Hello and welcome back to another episode of CamBro Conversations. And today's conversation, we are talking about how to stop your thoughts from controlling your life. To do so, we are joined by Albert Hobohm, entrepreneur, philosopher, and all-round academic who can actually apply the principles that he has studied over the years. Albert, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you, Colin. Thank you for having me. And thank you for recording this a second time as well. It's much appreciated.
Yes, not a problem at all. It's always important that we fit in and obviously get the best conversation from both of us for the listeners. And I know you've been everywhere and anywhere over the last few months, despite the pandemic, in terms of Oxford, Stockholm, but finally back settled in Sweden and happy with your environment as well, which is exciting.
Right. Yeah, no, very much so. Lots of things have happened the past sort of 6 months. Transformation really starting with an ayahuasca retreat in Costa Rica over New Year's Eve, and then I was able to finish my degree at Oxford. Past 2 months has been just beautiful over there. You know, it's a slight vaccine euphoria going on, and being able to really immerse myself in that culture. But yeah, now I'm home since 3 days ago, and it's feeling good.
Yeah, and you were saying that you've come home to a newly renovated flat, and that's almost like helped you to settle and feel more at home within those surroundings. How much of a role do you think environment plays in your mental state and how you feel?
I think it plays an immense role, to be honest. I think having a physical space, which you can actually, by the definition of the word, in a deeper sense, call a home. You know, you want to be able to have something that is a physical manifestation or reflection of what's going on inside you, and want to be having something that actually facilitates and supports whatever endeavor it is that you're going in. So for me right now, I'm in a situation where I feel that I need to access a bit more of the female and feminine energies, because I can be very solitary and become a one-man mission doing one thing on my own. But I need to invite that sort of organic caretaking energy around me, and so I've colored my walls purple here. So I'm trying to get a lot of plants going on, and it's really, I think it can be hard to notice in a certain situation, or just within a limited time span, how important it is. But I really do think that in the longer term, you do want something that reflects where you're aspiring to go mentally and actually facilitates your way of going there.
Yeah, that's incredibly interesting to think about. I wonder, when you were studying at Oxford, did you have that environment? How did you create that in a home away from home, so to speak? Obviously, it's maybe easier to do in Stockholm, which is where you've got your roots and you feel more settled, perhaps. But when you were abroad studying, were you able to create anything like that, where you maybe felt a space where you could create and be your best?
Yeah, well, so it's interesting because I think it goes back to having an environment that facilitates where you want to go or want to be. And for me, I wanted to really embrace the culture that is at Oxford. I mean, it's an incredibly fascinating environment to be in, and with lots of roots and traditions. So I had a sort of regular apartment, and I did not have lots of stuff that came from my actual home, but the target there for me was more to be out, to be meeting people, to interact with people, and visiting these old Bodleian libraries from the 1600s, and being able to have that and the whole town sort of as my physical space that would facilitate what I wanted to do there. And what I wanted to do there was to open myself up and sort of expand in order to be open to change and to getting new environmental inputs. So I guess the purpose was a little bit different there, but yeah, also there are practical issues with getting a very personalized apartment when I was only there for a year.
Yeah, no, I can completely understand that. So now that the degree's out of the way, what's next for you, Albert? How are you going to apply this learning and this mindset and all the things that have gone on in your life so far to your future?
Right, it's an interesting question. And so I had a few options. One of which was to go to a really interesting biotech company in Berlin called Atai. Mental health and mental illness is really at the core of what wakes me up in the morning and being able to contribute to that field. So Atai is a company valued at $2 billion, founded 2.5 years ago, and they put all their money in one basket, and that's psychedelic therapy, which is a really emerging space. And I did the analysis that the sort of outcome span for going to a company like that, like best case scenario, it's incredibly high, but worst case scenario, it turns out to be absolutely nothing. And the other option that I've chosen now is to go to a management consulting firm, McKinsey. And what I'm getting from there is really three things. The first of all is an incredible learning experience. So I'm sort of seeing it as an extension of my education. The second aspect is the brand value, which is global and is highly recognized. But the third one is something that probably drives me the most. And as you might know, between the age of 10 and 20, ice hockey was my life. And I was very close to breaking through to becoming a professional ice hockey player. And the greatest thing there really was that feeling of being part of a high performing team. You put in so many hours every day, you're on the ice 10 times a week, and you all work towards a common goal, and everyone is there by choice, and everyone really wants to make the best out of the situation themselves and their surroundings. And I'm hoping to get that sort of feeling from where I'm going now. So decided to join McKinsey. I'll start in August.
Fantastic. And I think that last point you mentioned there should shape a lot of our career decisions more than it maybe does. And the fact that you have that self-awareness is one of the reasons I was so keen to speak to you, because it appears that your understanding of what makes you fire in the right way is really heightened. And when I have conversations with people like this, I feel that I benefit on a personal, a selfish level, but also the audience benefit, because when we understand more about ourselves, we can apply those decisions. And you've used that mental model to make a decision that I like to be part of a team. As a child, largely 10 to 20, being part of a team shaped a lot of my happiness. If I can apply that in adulthood, post my studies, of which you've been across many major institutions now, you can find maybe more fulfillment in that career rather than a more, and I think you said this earlier about you have a tendency sometimes to have kind of solo pursuits and kind of be a little bit insular and shut away from the world. But it's fantastic that awareness has now led to a decision which hopefully in August pays off considerably.
Right. And I think it's important to understand that if you don't make your own plan, you become part of someone else's plan. It's a saying from the late philosopher Terence McKenna, and I just love that way of thinking, that every choice that we have and that are making is having really big impact on the quality of our lives and the direction that we are going. And so that sort of high pressure of doing big choices can sometimes cause me and cause people to get into a state of sort of inertia and not taking a decision. But the harsh reality about that fact is that not taking a decision is also a decision, and that has high consequences. And what I had to do is, like, on an emotional level, see what is it that I lack, what capacities is it that I lack right now in my life that does not come inherently naturally for me. I have no problem with putting in high hours of work. I have no problem being alone. I have no problem pushing me or pushing people towards other things. What I do have problems with is that I can become too solitary in that endeavor. I can become too harsh. I can become too cold. So having a understanding of that these are factors that I need to actively aspire for them to make them happen in my life, because all the other things that I previously mentioned, they just sort of come and roll for me naturally. So I need to have a very conscious way of deciding how I'm gonna get my weaknesses and target my weaknesses. And so for me, being part of a team, as you say, I think is a very important thing for me in order to become happy and fulfilled and have a long-term meaningful existence. But it's not something that comes naturally for me. Previously to my studies, I was out traveling. I was in Africa for 4 months, and I was in India for like 7 months. And most of that I did completely solo, which was a great thing. And it was great for my personal development. But it sort of come to a point where the marginal utility of that type of activities for me is becoming less and less. And the consequences of not having the presence of feminine energies and collaborations is becoming higher and higher. There's also the fact that when I graduated high school, say I'm 19, and 4 years onward, I was on this very, very expansive phase. I was exploring meditation. I was exploring unorthodox ways of altering my state of consciousness, and really, really digging deep into what could be called sort of as a empirical spirituality. But now I'm in a phase, I'm realizing, and I have done past sort of 6 months, that expansion is not what develops me the most, but actually a bit of contraction. So now I know that I'm in a steady base. I'm here in Stockholm. I know what I am going to do, and I can be able to integrate what I've learned during my expansion phase. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, that final point there around contraction, does that link into the idea of doing less things well, so narrow but deep, rather than wide and shallow? How does that relate? Have I assessed that correctly?
Right. No, I would agree to that. It's like when you go into an expansive phase and you open yourself up to all these opportunities, and you get hopefully new insights and new ideas of where you want to push yourself into life. In order to implement that, you will need to have a base. It could be like a physical base, or like in a temporal time span where you know what you're actually going to do, and you can hone in on the details much more efficiently than in a case where you don't control your environment. So, if you go to the same gym again and again, and you know how long it is there, and you know how your body reacts to certain nutrients beforehand, it's not a perfect going out traveling. The world is probably not a perfect environment for you to work on exactly how your rear delts are going to develop. You're going to need to have a very secure base in order to optimize that. So yeah, I would agree to that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think when it comes to your level of self-awareness and actualization, there is a bit of a battle for people to be open-minded in this space, and it can be quite challenging to their thought process to think on this level. How do you overcome maybe accusations? And I've heard you say this before in one of your TEDx-talks, is maybe being an overdressed monk. How do you overcome the maybe accusations that, oh, this stuff's like too spiritual for me, or it's too philosophical, it's too deep? How do you overcome those challenges?
So let me see, understand it right. In the way I communicate it, you mean?
Yeah,
right.
Communicate. So maybe somebody would, I think in your talk you said it's very easy for people to dismiss this level of discussion as somebody being an overdressed monk, because I've had different experiences to them, and maybe not like, for example, the time that you spent in India, the time you spent in Africa, obviously that has shaped how you think and how you behave now. How can you maybe translate that into the Western world, and maybe people like myself or people that would listen to this podcast?
Right. No, I think it's a great question, and that's the big challenge, isn't it? Because once you are, I was in Thailand, in the southern Thailand, on a meditation retreat, and you sit for 11 days, and you have a monk who's been a monk for 45 years talk about the exact path of how this is done, and you put in all of your effort in order to sort of condition the mind in a certain way. And that's all good and glad in that environment, but bringing it back home in the world of social media, physical, mental stimulants, how do we actually translate that, and how do we make it work, and also communicate it in a way that does make it work? And I think, one way of looking at it, because I've had it all through empirical experience. I am not inherently spiritual. I was born an atheist. I have high doubts about the, existence of higher powers and all of these Abrahamic religions. It's not really that I'm subscribing to some sort of institutionalized religion or code of life. Everything that I do and I subscribe to, I have derived from my own experience and from empirical work. And I think if there is someone who's actually doubting whether or not this works and will not be able to sort of take my words for it, I mean, you need to look into your life then and see, okay, do you have things that are definitely lacking in terms of your productivity, the quality of your relationships, the way you are focused, the amount of time you spend watching Game of Thrones, watching, Netflix, the amount of work you put into make the long term you be happy about you today, the way you relax, all of these things are, in my mind, a product of an unfocused and distracted mind that becomes addicted to constantly distracting itself, because the present moment is too hard to sort of grasp, and also that the patterns of thoughts and thereby the emotions as well become so entangled up in this vertigo and becomes addicted to higher and higher and higher speed of this emotional and cognitive thought loop. So if you realize that you have these problems, then the big thing is that whatever method you have applied for yourself and whatever methods you subscribe to, and the way you are thinking and the way you are living your life led you to this point, right? You're sitting here right now with these problems, and it's because of the way you have lived your life that you have these problems. It's only you. It's only your responsibility. It's not what your parents have done. It's not what your culture is telling you. It's not how sophisticated Google's data engineers are in absorbing your attention. It's your responsibility. And so you cannot solve your problem with a way of thinking that you have right now. And so that's where what I'm talking about is coming in. Let me see if that was concrete enough. I'll give the ball to you now.
I think that answers absolutely everything that I asked, because the first thing that I want to pull out from that is that intentionality piece. So you were talking there about, I think what I would categorize escapism. So somebody using Netflix, social media as a means of escaping their current thought loops and what's going on. As an example, to maybe try and help somebody listening, if I'm writing a particularly challenging email or presentation in work, I'm much more tempted to reach for my phone and look at Instagram or Twitter to escape the pain or the challenge of what I'm doing, because it's not coming to me easily. But what will come to me easily is a short-term dopamine hit to see that my new post has got some likes, or, oh, somebody on Twitter that I find funny has posted a meme that I enjoy. I'm using that as a distraction or an escape from the fact that I'm struggling with my thoughts to put down the words on an email that might actually move me closer to where I want to be. It might help me get a new customer. It might help me get more financial income. It might help me progress in my career. But because it's difficult, I'm using escapism. So that really speaks to me, because many of us will do that, and on a broader scale, on a much wider scale than just a particular task in work. You might come home from work and binge watch Netflix because you hate the fact that you've spent 9 to 5 doing something that doesn't fulfill you or doesn't challenge you or that you aren't good at. So that certainly speaks to me, Albert. I think that area in particular is something that many of the listeners will find themselves struggling with, even if they are overall happy. There'll be times during the day where they try to escape their thoughts with distraction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's, I think it's so important for us to understand how sophisticated our environment has become in getting us to continue on this wheel of escapism. Social media, the power of these technological tools, it's really an unspecific amplifier, right? Buying a new computer can contribute to immense productivity, but it can also contribute to being unparalleled unproductiveness. And so it's really up to us, because we have now these tools that leverage wherever our mind is going. And if you do not take full responsibility for where you're going in life, the powers of the capitalist market really, in a sense, will determine that for you. And so I often talk about that there are two types of stimulants that you want to really focus on in order to achieve some sort of higher capacity to control yourself and control your thoughts and therefore your life. And the first one, which I've just touched upon, are the mental stimulants. You know, we have watching porn, we have distracting ourselves with any type of like sensuality or lust, if it's in an unintentional way. We have most of us live in an incredibly urban environment, and we have all of these beautiful, hyper powerful tools that can keep our mind in a constantly distracted state where there is little to no actual presence or actual intentionality of what we're doing. We're sort of just turning off our consciousness and going with the stream of existence. And that's when we become subject to these powers. And so we can talk about also what to do about those, but let me first talk about the second one. So the first one was mental stimulants, and the other one is physical stimulants. And here we are talking about everything from sugar to cocaine to caffeine to nicotine. And again, almost, I believe, all of these I mentioned can be used in a very selective and careful way, but it's about really your intentionality, right? None of these things, Instagram and nicotine, are not inherently evil. They become evil for you if you allow them to take control over you. And so I think this sort of discussions that we are having can often be perceived as quite abstract. And I think, Colin, that's why it's hard to reach out sometimes to people. But if you really talk about mental stimulants and you have physical stimulants and get the insight of how determinant they are in actually painting out the quality of your life, then we can start to look into those variables and see how we can modulate them in order for them to become positive inputs. And for these inherently neutral aspects, mental and physical stimulants, how can they actually aid you in life instead of becoming a hurdle to where you want to go?
Completely understand what you're saying. And again, I think one of the reasons that you would maybe find challenge in this area, Albert, is because it's a little bit of an uncomfortable truth. Perhaps how somebody's employing a mental stimulant to deter or distract from pain internally or struggle or whatever it is. And then equally the physical, like you say, some people massively abuse caffeine, and that might be deemed as and that is obviously a negative because they're maybe not doing it intentionally. Whereas some people might use caffeine before a training session in an intentional way to increase performance, or they might use it before a podcast to speak on a quicker level and feel like they're more sharp. And equally on the reverse of that, you've named things like cocaine and other substances that people habitually maybe use because, oh, I'm going on a night out. That's what I take. That's what I use. So it's very interesting. And it's maybe an uncomfortable truth for people that some of the things that they put into their body, either mental or physical, are from a place of escapism, purely escapism, and not intentional escapism. There's not a use case for what they've chosen to do. So very challenging to think about. And I suppose I think to go even back before that, Albert, to your own story, what was your experience in this space with your use of these mental and physical stimulus?
Right. No, I think it's a great question. What makes me what validates that I have actually anything to come with here? And so this sort of abridged version of it is that, grew up with incredibly loving parents, both which struggled with addiction. And my mom passed away as an indirect consequence of that disease, leaving me with immense trauma and a very, very confused state during my end of high school. And I was having the experience that there were nothing in Western culture in terms of friends or coaches or therapists who were able to get to the very core of what my problem was. And so I think when I was 17, I was first exposed from direct experience to the fact that this culture inherently lacks something that has the capacity on a very clinical and scientifically defined level heal us. There is something in Western literature and science that lacks this capacity. And so that's when I turned to meditation, to intentional psychedelic use, and went to Africa and India in order to explore these very opaque fields from Western society. And I was at a point at this very meditation retreat that I mentioned with a monk called Tam Dhamma Vidhu. And I was decided right there and then that I wanted to become a monk and actually not come back. Because to this day, I believe that that is the most beautiful life you can experience because of the purity of your thoughts. So whatever we are talking about here and whatever level you have achieved or I have achieved is so far away from what they have achieved. But there also came a point later on where I realized that I have too good cards on my hand to stop playing the Western culture game because I do feel that I have things to contribute to, and I have things and attachments here back home that I'm not ready to let go. That would be a case of actually dropping everything from relationships to money and really swapping out the identity. So I decided to come back, and sort of the compass of my inspiration still is being able to integrate to the level it's possible, because it is possible on a distinct level, albeit not as much, implement the teachings that I have sort of learned, but also derived from myself. And as again, it's not a certain way or a method that's just Buddhism or any other thought stream. It is the fact that the core idea of everything that I'm talking about and the core idea of my TED Talk is that you have the capacity to actually change the content of your mind. And if you change the content of your mind, you can also talk about it from a aesthetic experience. You're changing the narrative of your story. Or if you want to use a more scientific engineering perspective, you change the model through which you interpret your data. Because you have everything that happens in you. You have your reality, your relationships, your successes, your failures. But the framework through which you actually choose to interpret that is what decides what your life looks like. And I find it that there are surprisingly few who have access to this very idea and the power of that idea, because it's transdiagnostic. If everything starts and ends with the perception you have, the emotions you have, and the cognition that you have. And if you are able to slightly shift that operating system of yours, the data that comes through is going to be the same, but the way you live your life is going to be different. And I'm not saying it's the solution to every problem there is, because it's not, but it will change the lens through which you look at everything. And I feel that for me, it's by far the most important insight that I've had in my life.
Yeah, and
if I can help to open up the idea to this, especially to secularist traditional thinkers, then I'm very happy with the outcome.
And largely why you decided not to continue down the path of being a monk is because you can give this value to people through your current guise, your future career. And that is a value, it's a contribution beyond if you were to exclude yourself from the game and stay in India or Africa, wherever it was that you were going through that experience.
Right. Well, that's the pink, beautiful side of the story, which is also true. I do feel that on some sense, it becomes a sort of a higher purpose because it actually is not inherently focused on me, but actually contributing. But then you have the aspect also, of course, that um, it's ego driven. You know, I feel that there are some competences and ideas that I have been able to retain, and if I can spread them, that also helps me. And then there's also the fact that, you know, being and spending time with Buddhist monks in Thailand and realizing how much they have let go of their every desire that they have, and making that the only focus that they have. I was not ready to do that, but I did realize the actual price of it. So, you know, coming back and being able to enjoy um, the attachments and the sins and the stimulants and the distractions that life has to offer, because it's a beautiful roller coaster that we have, but also trying to really retain that source.
Yeah, I think that's healthy. And again, that acknowledgement of there's an element of ego that's maybe driving you to have a positive impact is the best way for you to channel your ego, rather than the way that many people channel their ego, which is negatively. So when we talk about these physical and these mental stimulus, we've got some of your background there in terms of your own relationships with those. What are some of the strategies? You called it meditation for starters. Would that be an entry point for somebody listening to this to try and better control their thoughts?
Yes, I would absolutely agree to that. And here's the, you know, when it comes down to the core, like, okay, what concretely can we do in order to get, you know, as fast and efficient effect as possible, because that's how we build, right? In this culture, we want that. So Sam Harris, philosopher and neuroscientist from California, is just amazing in the way he has developed his new app. Well, it's not quite new anymore, but it's called the Waking Up app from Sam Harris. And they go through, I believe it's a 30-day course where it's 10 minutes each. And it does not only include actual meditation, but it goes through all of the real basics and theoretical basis and practical ones of how meditation actually works. And it's, you know, 10, 12 minutes per day, so it's not a big commitment. And I really, really appreciate Sam Harris because he, in a way, has a similar background to me or you, that he's a super competent intellectual leader and has his roots hard in science, but also explores and acknowledges the spiritual reality that we actually have. So I would definitely recommend the Sam Harris Waking Up app.
And that's like an entry point for somebody that's a bit, that wants to be practical and wants things done quickly, which is the problem, isn't it? For a lot of us, we want that instant, not gratification, but we want that instant feeling that we're working towards something in that way. When you go away to places like you have done, Albert, and you shut yourself off from the world, does that reprogram some of your habits and behaviors around, for example, consumption of mainstream media, social media, for when you come back? Do you feel like you're more in control, or do you come back and just go straight into the same habits that you had before, in terms of maybe checking your phone, checking your laptop, checking your emails, whatever that looks like?
There's definitely a bigger span in time, and there is a filter between you and whatever that bad behavior is. You can still make the choice to go straight back in being distracted and watching TikTok and scrolling through Reddit, but there is a bigger span in between, because the mind realizes that if I go that way, I will lose the very subtle peace that I have right now mentally, the silence of the thoughts, the way the thought patterns works. It becomes much more, after those 10 days or after one of those retreats, it definitely becomes more more eloquent, more controlled, and less on the one hand narcissistic, on the other hand, beating yourself down. It becomes a less insane mind in the very definition of the word. Because what the big challenge here is with meditation is that it's incredibly boring and incredibly undistracting. And going to one of those retreats, it's quite harsh. You sleep on a wooden pillow, you have a bell ringing at 4:30 in the morning, you eat rice and vegetable twice a day, and you don't talk to anyone, you cannot write, you cannot work out, you cannot look anyone in the eyes. So everything that our brains are, evolutionarily designed to addict to, in the sense of the word, we do it and then we want it more, you take away. And having the like, I can still remember when I was at my first retreat, when I had the realization of how pathologically little control I had over the contents of my thoughts, and also the discrepancy between my idea of how little control I thought I had and how little it actually was. I mean, that was a big deal for me. And one can almost say that, the ego structure that we have is amazing in, creating the Falcon rockets and creating nuclear energy and all of these technological, mathematical, brilliant structures, and also social hierarchies and centralized power. All of these things is a product of a thinking human being. But our biggest gift is also our biggest curse. We cannot stop thinking. We cannot stop having these emotions and attaching to them and attaching to everything around us. And that's what really the meditation is trying to do. And we are, if it's a new practice, it's quite challenging to do. And it's not a quick fix, and it's not something that gives you a great dopamine kick. And that's the whole idea of it, to be able to have a, flow of subtle but slightly interesting, neurotransmitter pumping out to you. But it's from the absence of stimuli rather from the presence of it. And to shift that, to make the psyche actually prefer, or being able to prefer when deciding to, that absence of distractions, it's a big job.
Yeah.
But it's completely doable. It has distinct effects, but one, it's like, I often compare it to starting to work out. Do it 4 times a week and do it for 3 months, and there will be effects, but it's not going to be something that happens overnight.
Yeah, the benefits will compound, and there's a lot of inertia with meditation, even more so than there is with working out, to get through. And I think that's where a lot of us fall off in that period, where we can't see the return, or it's so sore and painful to find that we're not good at something versus something that maybe has a more immediate level of return. What would you say were some of the other key things that you learned when you spent time with the Buddhist monks that you would reintroduce back to people in this space?
So one thing is the actual absence of everyday tools that we have really does make a big difference. And so I found that in the category of mental stimulants, it's also true that, the saying that you are what you eat, but it's also true within the realm of information. You are what you actually consume mentally. And I think in complement to meditation, probably the biggest thing that we can do in order to have a higher presence, more focus, and more intentionality in what we do, is to eliminate distractions. And so the obvious ones are, and we've heard them 1,000 times, but limit your social media use, limit the time you spend in high intense urban environment. Or if you can't do that, add nature in one way or another. Limit the processed food. It's actually in the absence, and this is the whole idea of meditation, it's the absence of distractions that creates the effect. It's not the presence of consuming something. It's not the presence of learning something. It's not the presence of having an idea. It's not the presence of eating something. It's not about presence of stimuli in any sense. It's actually in the absence where it happens. And one way to actively do it would be meditation, but another one would be, allow your mind to have some mental space. Allow the mind to settle down. And concretely, I would say, limiting social media use, limiting, say, processed food, or whatever you deem is actual bad food. If you can just get those three components, social media use, meditation, and your diet, there will be tangible effects that will improve your life, And I would absolutely love, for someone who does not sort of believe in the actual effect it has, well, as Terence McKenna said, if it's true, it can take the pressure, Go and do this, do it 4 times a week for 3 months, and then get back to me and tell me it didn't work.
Yeah, exactly that. Most people that would dismiss challenging or big changes to their lifestyle would not adhere for that level of time. They would give it a week. They would give it 2 days, maybe even less. No, doesn't work for me. Can't do that. And that is, I think, inherently where the problem lies, our inability to adhere to challenging protocols. And one of the things that I like so much about your message, Albert, is that you've given an addition. So an addition is meditation, but also one of the best ways for us to improve our quality of life is through subtraction of other areas. So by subtracting negative or potentially negative influences when we don't use them intentionally, we can actually get a better output. So it's not always just about adding habits. It's not always about adding a gratitude journal or adding cold showers or adding morning meditation. It's sometimes about removing elements of our life that are a net negative rather than a net positive. So I find that extremely interesting. And I know that you're a keen runner as well. What role does exercise play for you within controlling your thoughts?
Right. Yeah. No. I think this is a great segue into this very area that I want to talk about, and it's the fact that it is not always easy to apply these things, and so I have stretches of time where I am unable to meditate. There is no motivation in my willpower tank to actually do it. So we have to look at it. What is it that meditation is trying to give us that we want? And can we have that from some other sort of activity? And really at the core of it, I feel, is what being more present, and actual presence does is in order to get actual qualitative presence, you to a high degree need to have an absence of thoughts. The ultimate goal of meditation is not to stop thinking, it is presence. And lots of people will say it's not about actually silencing your thoughts. I kind of don't agree with that, because inherently, the other side of the coin of presence is not being distracted, right? And not thinking. So what I find actually helpful is going out running, because I feel I have a very high kinetic need to move myself. And when I go out running, and I go out for I like long distance running that is minimal in the terrain or in actual scenery. So I have a gym nearby where it's almost like a black cellar, and I just run there with my hoodie on, because then I cannot see almost anything, and there's nothing that happens, and I can just almost run with my eyes closed, because then I have more less access to distractions, but there is an injection into my sort of consciousness or cognitive stream of dopamine and serotonin, that helps me stay in that present moment. And so, yes, I do find long distance running to be incredibly helpful, especially when I don't have the willpower or discipline to actually just sit or lay down and do meditation. So I find that we need to find these sort of compromises that has a 80-20 effect, and definitely running is like that. Another thing that I like to do is that I DJ techno music, and I can just absolutely absorb into the experience of creating and manipulating electronic music. So these are activities, and I think they're different for more or less everyone, but you want to have something in your life that absolutely absorbs your focus without being too stimulating for you. So let me give you an example. The last time, if you imagine watching one of your favorite movies and it's the first time you see that movie, you put on the movie or the cinema goes on, and then 2 hours later it's over and you have barely had a single thought. That is incredible mindfulness. The problem is that the movie is so stimulating that it absorbs your consciousness in a way that you don't want. And that's why meditation is sort of the ultimate mindfulness practice, because it does not, it's not at all stimulating. So you have, on sort of a scale, doing a highly addictive stimulant on the top, and then you have meditation at the absolute bottom. They both create incredible presence if done properly, but then you have running a bit above meditation, and perhaps, for me, creating and mixing techno music is a bit above that as well. So what we want is to have our consciousness absorbed into something, and the less that object stimulates you, the better it is. But the ultimate goal really is to have a highly focused, qualitatively present consciousness.
Yeah, a huge amount of that links into the idea of a flow state, doesn't it? But importantly, you've put in within that the caveat that you could enter a flow state watching a film, or maybe lifting weights, or maybe in a nightclub on other stimulants. And that's at the high level of stimulus. And although you've got mindfulness because you're absorbed in the activity, it's so stimulating that actually can be a net negative because it's so consuming. Whereas at the other end of the level, you fall into a flow state during a run with minimal stimulus. You fall into this with meditation, of course, that's the ultimate. Or even when you're creating your content in your music, you're so absorbed in it, but it's not so stimulating that it almost you lose yourself in a negative way, and you don't have any awareness of what's going on. So I find that very interesting, and I know that many of us enter flow states doing activities that are just enough. They're just sufficiently challenging enough to get that area of our mind in the right place, but not so stimulating that we are stretched beyond our capacity to do so. So that was what immediately came to my mind in terms of other ideas that I've heard in that space that I can put a reference point on, so to speak, Albert, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think we have to realize also that we are not, dematerialistic monks sitting in a jungle in Asia, right? We are trying to live the life to the best of our capacities in this framework. And so we have to deal with the playing field the way the playing field is built. So we have to, because we have these incredibly sophisticated environmental inputs that try to fetch our attention. I do believe that it is all right, to have activities that are pushing back a little against the grain, against the matrix, so to speak. And if we have to create, a just sufficiently a high dose of dopaminergic release in order to enter that flow state, that's all right. The basic point already, is still coming across.
Yeah, it's a pretty powerful prescription, isn't it, in terms of the way forward for people to control their thoughts better. Is there anything else that you would point people in the direction of before we start to wrap up, Albert? Anything else that you think would be highly beneficial for people to explore in this space to better control what's going on inside that head of theirs?
So I think we touched upon the key areas. And, if you are unwilling to make changes that you haven't done before, you better settle with having a less qualitative, less life quality than you actually want to. And, that will create resentment, right? Because we don't want that, but we don't also want to do the job that's required to grow in the way we want it to grow. And so, open your mind, go for direct experiences. It doesn't matter if you understand these ideas. It's not going to help you to just understand. It's all about implementation. And I challenge anyone, do these things, do meditation, control your environmental input, mental input, and physical input. Do it for 4 days a week and do it for 3 months. And please come back and tell me that it doesn't work. And please come back and tell me that it didn't significantly improve your life. I would love to hear about that, because I think the scientific and, for me, like, anecdotal evidence is so high about that these things actually works. I just think that there is a lag, there's a lag of maybe 10 years before it becomes completely conventional that the clinical effects of technology, social media, AdSense, or whatever you want to put in instead of social media. I think everyone understands the basic idea here. It is going to be significant. So nothing more than that to say, but I think it was a great talk.
Yeah, I'm excited to see the output of this. And personal responsibility is a theme that comes up again and again when I speak with high agency people who are intelligent and practical like yourself, Albert. So I'm very glad that you raised that. Now, for those that do dive down the rabbit hole and they do push themselves to be a higher version, where's the best place for them to give you an update, Albert, in a few months' time? Where should they head to work? Where can you be
Yeah,
found?
great. Yeah, sure. I mean, just, I'm on Instagram. I'm on Twitter. It's Albert Hobohm there. I guess you can see my name in the podcast.
Yep.
Or shoot me an email, albert@hobohm.com. I would love to talk more about this and see, in whatever way I can contribute, or in whatever way you would not agree with me. This is the most interesting and fascinating thing and ideas I have in my life. So I would love to talk more about it.
Fantastic, Albert. All of those will be linked in the show notes below. Thank you again to everyone listening. I'm sure you've enjoyed this one. If you have done, please take a screenshot, pop it on your Instagram story, tag me @call.cambro, and I'll be back to speak to you all again very, very soon.